Chapter 1, The Field Trip Idea. Benson never believed in complicating a good thing. He stood in his classroom, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest effort but not so much that it looked intentional, staring at the terrarium on the back shelf like it might answer him if he waited long enough. Inside, a tiny ecosystem thrived, soil, moss, a few industrious isopods, and if you squinted, it almost looked like a forest holding its breath. Mr. Benson? Kyle blinked and turned. 20 small faces watched him, varying degrees of patience and curiosity written across them. Right, he said, lightly clapping his hands once. Science. A few kids laughed. That was good. Laughter meant they were still with him. He walked over to the whiteboard, grabbing a marker. So we've talked about ecosystems, right? About how everything connects. Like food chains, someone offered. Exactly. And habitats. And decomposition, another added, wrinkling their nose. Kyle nodded approvingly. And decomposition, which is gross, but important. A beat passed. Then he said it almost offhand. What if we saw one in real life? The room went still. What do you mean? Asked Emma, leaning forward. Kyle hesitated just a fraction. He hadn't meant to say it aloud yet. But now that it was out there, the idea felt suddenly solid, like something he'd been circling for a while and finally stepped into. I mean, he said, turning slightly so he wasn't facing them head-on. What if we took a trip somewhere, where you could see how things work outside of a jar? Like a zoo? Asked Marcus. Kyle smiled. Better than a zoo. There were murmurs now, the kind that spread quickly, building momentum. Where would we go? Is it far? Are there bugs? Are they big bugs? Kyle lifted a hand. Okay. One question at a time. He leaned against the edge of his desk, considering how to explain it without sounding like he'd completely lost his mind. It's my grandparents' place, he said. Out in the country. That quieted things again, but in a different way, curiosity sharpened into focus. They've got land, he continued. River access, gardens, wildlife. It's real. Not staged. Not behind fences. He paused, then added, because honesty felt easier than editing it out. There are bobcats. A chorus of what? Erupted immediately. Kyle winced, though he'd expected it. But there, he started. Like mountain lions? Do they eat people? Can we pet one? Absolutely not, Kyle said quickly to the last one, though his tone held a flicker of amusement. They're not dangerous in that setting. That wasn't entirely accurate, but it wasn't inaccurate either. The cats had always behaved. Why? Asked Noah, narrowing his eyes suspiciously. Why aren't they dangerous? Kyle exhaled softly. Because they've been there a long time. Generations. They're used to people. My grandparents never forced anything, never fed them like pets. They just coexist. The children leaned in as one, drawn by the quiet certainty in his voice. They're still wild, he added. But they've claimed the place, and somehow that includes us. There was a moment of silence, and Kyle could see it happening, imagination catching fire. Can we go? Emma asked, barely above a whisper. Kyle straightened. That depends on the principal. Principal Hardwick had the expression of a man who measured enthusiasm in carefully weighed portions and rarely found it justified. Kyle sat across from his desk, hands resting loosely on his thighs, posture relaxed but attentive. A field trip, Hardwick repeated. To a private residence, with wild animals. Kyle nodded once. Yes, sir. And you believe this is appropriate for third graders? I do. Hardwick leaned back slightly, studying him. Kyle let the silence sit. He wasn't a salesman. He didn't dress things up or push harder than necessary. He simply laid things out and trusted the weight of them. Finally, he said, it's educational. Biology, ecology, practical skills. They'll plant flowers, learn basic food preparation, observe animal behavior in a natural environment. And the safety concerns? Kyle met his gaze evenly. Managed. The animals don't approach unless they want to. The children will be supervised at all times. My grandparents have hosted groups before. That last part wasn't strictly frequent, but it wasn't untrue either. Hardwick steepled his fingers. Funding. No cost beyond transportation. Liability waivers? I'll handle the paperwork. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Hardwick nodded once, decisively. Very well. But you will not be the sole supervising adult. Kyle lifted an eyebrow slightly. I wasn't expecting to be. I'm assigning Ms. Hart to accompany you. Kyle's mind flickered briefly, connecting the name to a face. Sharp eyes, quick observations, a tendency to ask questions that didn't always need answers but always demanded them anyway. Understood, he said. And parent volunteers, Hardwick added. Minimum of 3. Of course. Hardwick leaned forward slightly. Mr. Benson, I trust your judgment, but I expect this to be handled with absolute care. Kyle nodded. It will be. Lila Hart knocked once on the doorframe before stepping into Kyle's classroom later that afternoon. I hear we're taking a trip into the wilderness, she said. Kyle looked up from a stack of permission slips he'd already started drafting. News travels fast. I make it my business to stay informed, she replied, crossing her arms lightly. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something close to it at the edges. Kyle gestured to one of the student desks. Have a seat. She didn't. Instead, she walked slowly around the room, taking it in, the terrarium, the pin diagrams, the neatly labeled bins. Bobcats, she said after a moment. That's right. Plural. Yes. She turned to face him. And you're completely serious. Kyle leaned back slightly in his chair. Always. Lila studied him, searching for something. Hesitation, exaggeration, a crack in the calm. She didn't find one. How many? She asked. Kyle considered the question. Depends on the season. That's not reassuring. Somewhere between 20 and 50. She stared at him. Kyle shrugged lightly. They come and go. And you think this is a good idea? I think, he said carefully. It's a real one. That landed. Lila exhaled slowly, then, unexpectedly, laughed. All right, she said. I'm in. Kyle smiled, just a little. Good. She tilted her head. But if I get eaten by a bobcat, I'm haunting you specifically. That seems fair. For a moment, the room felt lighter, like something had shifted into alignment. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the playground. Inside, plans began to take shape. Not complicated, not elaborate, just something honest and steady. Kyle gathered the papers on his desk, stacking them neatly. A field trip. Simple enough. At least that's what he told himself. Chapter 2. The drive out. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp, uncomplicated morning Kyle appreciated. No drama in the sky. No urgency in the air. Just a clean stretch of blue and the quiet promise that everything would unfold at its own pace if he didn't try to force it. Kyle stood beside the school bus, hands tucked loosely into his jacket pockets, watching his students trickled in with an energy that hovered somewhere between excitement and the early stages of chaos. Mr. Benson. Emma skipped over, backpack bouncing. I told my mom about the bobcats, and she said I'm not allowed to get eaten. That's a very reasonable rule, Kyle said. I also packed extra snacks, she added proudly. Also reasonable. Behind her, two boys argued about whether a bobcat could beat a crocodile. Kyle chose not to intervene. Some debates needed to run their course. He glanced at his watch, then at the growing cluster of parents. The volunteer chaperones were easy to spot. Slightly anxious, overly prepared, each one scanning the situation like it might suddenly require decisive action. Mr. Benson. Kyle turned at the sound of his name. Lila Hart approached with a travel mug in one hand and a clipboard tucked under her arm. She wore comfortable shoes, a good sign, and an expression that suggested she'd already anticipated 3 problems and solved at least one. Morning, Kyle said. Morning. She handed him a sheet from the clipboard. Final head count. I double-checked the permission slips. Kyle glanced over it briefly, then nodded. Looks solid. Lila watched him, eyebrows lifting just slightly. That's it? No adjustments? No second guessing? I trust your count. She blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. All right, she said after a moment. A parent interrupted to ask about seating, and the last few minutes before departure blurred into motion. Bags loaded, names checked, reminders given. Eventually, the bus hissed softly as the door folded shut. Kyle took a seat near the middle, close enough to monitor but far enough to avoid becoming the center of attention. Lila slid in beside him, setting her clipboard on her lap. The engine rumbled to life, and just like that, they were moving. At first, the energy was electric. Voices layered over one another in rising waves. Questions, guesses, half-remembered facts shouted with absolute certainty. Do they climb trees? Are they faster than dogs? I read they can jump 10 feet. My cousin said, inside voices. Lila interjected smoothly without raising her volume. Somehow it worked. The noise dipped, not disappearing but settling into something manageable. Kyle leaned back slightly, watching the scenery shift outside the window. Buildings softened into suburbs. Suburbs thinned into open stretches of land. It happened gradually, the way most meaningful changes did. You're very calm about all this, Lila said beside him, her voice low enough to stay out of earshot of the students. Kyle glanced over. Should I not be? Well, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the bus full of children. This is a moving collection of unpredictability headed toward what you described as 20 to 50 wild predators. When you put it like that, Kyle said thoughtfully, it does sound less organized. Lila almost smiled. Do you always do that? She asked. Do what? Understate things until they sound harmless. Kyle considered the question. Only when they are. And the rest of the time? I don't say them. She studied him again, as if trying to decide whether that was deflection or sincerity. All right, she said finally. Then explain your childhood. That's a broad request. You grew up going to this place every summer, she said. With wild animals that apparently behave like house cats. Not all the time, Kyle said. Just with us. That's still unusual. That depends on what you're used to. Lila leaned back in her seat, crossing one leg over the other. All right, Mr. Benson. Convince me this isn't completely insane. Kyle watched the road ahead for a moment before answering. They weren't always close, he said. The cats. Okay. They stayed at the edges at first, watching. My grandparents never chased them off. Never tried to tame them either. So they just decided to stay? More or less. Lila tilted her head. Animals don't usually work like that. Kyle shrugged slightly. People don't usually leave them alone long enough to find out. That earned him a pause. And the numbers? She pressed. You weren't exaggerating? No. She exhaled. That's a lot of bobcats, Kyle. It is. And your grandparents are just okay with that. They treat them like neighbors, Kyle said. Respectful distance. Mutual understanding. And the children? They stay supervised. We don't force interactions. Lila tapped her fingers lightly against her mug. You realize I'm going to be watching everything very closely. I'd expect nothing less. And if I feel like something isn't safe, then we adjust, Kyle said simply. She nodded once, apparently satisfied. For a while, they sat in companionable silence. The hum of the bus, the occasional burst of laughter from the back rows, the rhythmic passing of fence posts. It all blended into something steady, almost meditative. About an hour in, the energy shifted. Children who had been bouncing in their seats started to quiet. A few leaned against windows, watching the countryside roll by with wide-eyed attention. Others whispered, their enthusiasm softening into anticipation. Is it far? Emma asked from across the aisle. Not much longer, Kyle said. How will we know we're there? Kyle's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the land dipped gently toward a line of trees. You'll know, he said. They turned onto the gravel road without ceremony. The bus rattled slightly as the surface changed, and a few students perked up instantly. Is this it? Are we close? I see trees. Lila leaned forward, peering through the windshield. This doesn't look like a typical field trip destination. Kyle smiled faintly. That's the point. The road curved gently, revealing more of the property bit by bit. First the open fields, then the old wooden fence, weathered but sturdy. And then, finally, the house. It sat comfortably in the landscape, like it had grown there rather than been built. Wide porch, sloping roof, smoke curling faintly from a chimney that didn't strictly need to be lit this time of year. Two figures stood out front, already waiting. Grandma and Grandpa? Emma whispered, pressing closer to the window. Yep. The bus slowed to a stop, gravel crunching beneath the tires. For a moment, no one moved. Then Kyle stood. All right, he said, voice calm but carrying. Remember what we talked about. Stay together. Listen carefully. Ask questions. He glanced once at Lila. She nodded. The door opened with a soft mechanical sigh. Warm country air drifted inside. And just beyond it, subtle at first, easy to miss if you didn't know what to look for, movement. Low to the ground. Quiet. Watching. Kyle stepped off the bus first. By the time his feet hit the gravel, he could already feel it. The familiar sense of being observed, not as prey, not as an intruder, but as something known. Something expected. Behind him, Lila followed. She took one step down, then another, and then she stopped. Kyle, she said carefully. Yeah, I think I see one. Kyle didn't turn immediately. Yeah, he said. You probably do. Lila didn't move. Neither did the shape in the tall grass a few yards away. Golden eyes, still body, absolute attention. One became two, then three. Kyle finally glanced back at her. Welcome, he said easily. To the part one didn't exaggerate. Chapter 3, First Encounters. For a long moment, nothing happened. The bus door stood open behind them. Students hovering at its threshold like a tide waiting to decide whether to roll forward or pull back. The adults clustered just behind, protective instinct warring with curiosity. And in the tall grass beyond the gravel drive, the bobcats watched. Kyle let the silence stretch. It wasn't tension. Not the kind that snapped or stung, but something quieter, like the space between breaths. He'd learned long ago that rushing this part never helped. They see us, he said, his tone even and conversational, as if narrating something ordinary. We don't need to prove anything to them. Are they going to come closer? Lila asked. Her voice was calm, but he could hear the careful restraint in it, the kind that came from someone very deliberately not reacting. Maybe, Kyle said, if they feel like it. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be, he replied gently. He took a few steps forward, boots crunching softly on the gravel, and raised a hand. Not in a wave, exactly, but in acknowledgement. Hey, he said, like greeting an old neighbor. One of the cats shifted. It wasn't a dramatic movement, just a subtle adjustment, a turn of the head, the sun catching along the ridge of its ears. Another flicked its tail. Behind him, a child gasped. They're so big, someone whispered. Kyle glanced back toward the bus. All right, he said, projecting just enough to reach them all without breaking the fragile calm. We're going to step off slowly. Stay together. No running. No shouting. He paused, then added with a faint hint of a smile. They don't like being startled any more than you do. That seemed to land. One by one, the children descended from the bus, clustering instinctively into a loose group. Lila stayed near the front, eyes moving constantly, counting heads, gauging distance, cataloging details. Kyle appreciated that about her. She didn't freeze. She assessed. Mr. Benson, Marcus whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. That one is staring at me. Kyle followed his gaze to a young bobcat sitting just beyond the fence line, its golden eyes fixed intently in Marcus's direction. It probably is, Kyle said. Why? Because you're new, he replied. Marcus swallowed, then squared his shoulders slightly, as if deciding not to be the most interesting thing in the world anymore. Okay, he said, more to himself than anyone else. A soft creak of wood drew Kyle's attention toward the house. His grandparents had stepped down from the porch. His grandfather moved first, steady, unhurried, the kind of walk that suggested he'd never seen the need to rush for anything that mattered. His grandmother followed with a dish towel draped over her shoulder, already smiling like the entire scene was exactly what she'd hoped for. Well now, she called, voice warm and carrying easily. Look at all these guests. The children turned as one, their attention snapping toward something far easier to understand than a ring of watchful predators. Hi, a chorus answered. Kyle exhaled quietly. That was one shift managed. Grandma, he said, meeting them halfway. Grandpa. His grandfather gave a small nod. Brought the whole classroom, did you? Most of it. Good, his grandmother said, stepping in to hug Kyle briefly before turning to the group. Welcome, everyone. We've been expecting you. She clasped her hands together, eyes bright. Now, before anything else, I'm going to ask you all to do me a favor. The children leaned in instinctively. Be kind, she said, to each other, and to everything you see here. This place works best that way. Emma nodded solemnly. We can do that. I believe you can, the older woman said. Lila had stepped closer by now, though she kept a careful distance from the nearest cat, her gaze flicking between the animals and Kyle's grandparents with open curiosity. You must be Ms. Hart, Grandma said, as if she'd been expecting her specifically. I am, Lila replied. And you are remarkably calm about all of this. Grandma laughed softly. Oh, I was nervous the first 10 years. Lila blinked. 10 years. You get used to most things, Grandpa added, his voice dry but not unkind. Kyle watched Lila process that, saw the moment she set aside the instinct to question and simply accept, for now, that this place operated under its own rules. All right, she said after a beat. I'm officially intrigued. Good, Grandma said. That's the right mindset. A flicker of movement drew everyone's attention back to the field. One of the smaller bobcats, a juvenile, still lanky in that way young animals often were, had stepped forward. It moved slowly, deliberately, each paw placed with quiet precision. Is it coming closer? Emma whispered. Yes, Kyle said. No one move, Lila added immediately. Relax, Kyle murmured to her, not looking away from the cat. It's curious. The bobcat stopped a few feet from the edge of the group, sitting back on its haunches. Its gaze moved from face to face, lingering just a fraction longer on Kyle. Recognition. Kyle crouched slowly, lowering himself to the animal's level. Hey there, he said. Lila tensed slightly. Kyle. He didn't reach out, didn't extend a hand. He just waited. The bobcat's ears twitched forward. It took one step closer, then another, closing the gap just enough that the distance felt intentional. Kyle extended 2 fingers, slowly, letting the motion speak instead of his voice. The cat leaned in. It was so quick it nearly escaped notice, a brief, deliberate nudge of its head against his hand. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Oh my gosh, Emma breathed. Kyle smiled faintly, scratching lightly behind the cat's ear. There you are. The bobcat closed its eyes briefly, leaning into the contact with an ease that felt almost impossible given everything they knew about it. Lila stared. That, she said under her breath, should not be happening. And yet, Kyle replied, not looking up. The moment didn't linger. After a few seconds, the cat pulled back, giving a soft flick of its tail before turning and trotting off, disappearing into the grass as quietly as it had emerged. The spell broke. Questions erupted immediately. Can we pet them? Are they friendly? Do they have names? Can we take one home? No, Kyle answered in quick succession, standing again. No, sometimes no, and absolutely not. Grandma clapped her hands lightly. All right, before anyone decides to adopt wildlife, let's get started. She gestured toward the yard, where several small tables had been arranged. We've got planting over here, she said. Fresh soil, real seeds, and instructions if you need them. Grandpa pointed toward a neatly organized station with tools and small pots. Gentle hands, he added. Plants don't rush, and neither should you. And over here, Grandma continued, we're making lemonade the proper way. A cheer went up at that. Real lemons? Someone asked. The only kind worth using, she replied. The energy shifted again, fear dissolving into excitement, curiosity finding an outlet. Kyle watched as the children broke into smaller groups, chaperones guiding them gently into the planned activities. Lila lingered beside him for a moment longer. "I don't understand it," she said quietly. Kyle followed her gaze to the field, where more shapes moved between the grass and the trees. "You don't have to," he said. "That's not how I work." "I noticed." She crossed her arms lightly. "There has to be a reason. Behavior like that doesn't just happen." Kyle tilted his head slightly, considering. "Maybe not," he said. "Or maybe the reason isn't something we measure." Lila exhaled, glancing back at the children laughing around the lemonade table. "They're not afraid," she said. "They don't have a reason to be," Kyle replied. She looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to place him within something familiar and finding that he didn't quite fit. "You're very comfortable here," she said. Kyle nodded once. "I am. And you don't feel the need to explain it." "Not everything needs explaining." Lila shook her head slightly, but there was no frustration in it this time. Just a quiet, growing curiosity. "Well," she said, pushing off from her spot, "I suppose I'll have to experience it instead." Kyle smiled faintly. "That's usually how it works." As she moved toward the children, clipboard already back in hand, Kyle turned his attention to the property. The day had fully settled now, sunlight warming the earth, the hum of activity blending with the softer, quieter presence of the cats. And just at the edge of it all, barely visible unless you knew where to look, the bobcats watched. Not distant, not wary, simply there, waiting, perhaps, to see what kind of story this day would become. Chapter 4, Controlled Chaos. If Chapter 3 had been quiet wonder, then Chapter 4 unfolded like a carefully managed storm. It started gently enough. Kyle stood near the planting tables, sleeves rolled a little higher now, guiding a small cluster of students through the delicate process of filling clay pots with soil. Dirt had a way of equalizing things. Kids who were loud grew thoughtful, the timid ones found focus. It grounded them in a way a classroom rarely could. "Not too much," he said, watching Noah shovel soil with unnecessary enthusiasm. "You're planting seeds, not burying treasure." "But treasure needs protection," Noah argued, peering into the pot. "These seeds need sunlight," Kyle countered. "Different kind of survival." Noah considered that, then carefully removed some soil with exaggerated precision. "Better. Much." A few feet away, Lila moved briskly between groups, clipboard abandoned on the nearest table in favor of actual hands-on involvement. She knelt beside Emma, demonstrating how to press the soil gently instead of compressing it into something resembling concrete. "Think of it like a bed," she said. "Soft enough to rest in, but not so loose you fall through." Emma nodded seriously. "So, cozy dirt." "Exactly." Kyle watched that interaction for a moment longer than necessary. She was different out here, less structured somehow. Still precise, still attentive, but not rigid. Like she'd loosened something without losing control. "Mr. Benson," Marcus called. Kyle turned just in time to see Marcus holding up a seed packet triumphantly, and then immediately trip over his own feet. The packet flew. A small cascade of seeds scattered into the air, catching sunlight before disappearing into the dirt below. There was a stunned pause. Then Marcus groaned. "I lost them." Kyle walked over, crouching beside him. "You didn't lose them," he said, brushing soil lightly with his fingers. "You just planted more than you planned." Marcus blinked. "So it's still okay?" Kyle smiled faintly. "It's messy. That's not the same thing as wrong." Lila, passing by, overheard that and shot him a quick look. Not disagreement, recognition. By the lemonade station, things were less philosophical and far more chaotic. Kyle's grandmother stood at the center of it all, orchestrating with effortless authority while a semicircle of children attempted to keep up. "No, sweetheart, you turn it this way," she said, guiding small hands around a metal juicer. "We're coaxing the juice out, not wrestling it." "It's resisting," one boy insisted. "Well, so would you if someone was squeezing you," she replied, entirely unfazed. A ripple of laughter followed. Bowls of freshly sliced lemons sat scattered across the table, their bright scent cutting through the warm air. Juice dripped, sugar spilled, and at least one student had already tasted something prematurely and made a face that suggested deep regret. "Too sour?" Grandma asked kindly. The girl nodded, lips puckered. "Good," Grandma said. "That means you'll appreciate it when we fix it." Lila stepped in beside her, picking up a pitcher. "What's the ratio?" Grandma glanced at her. "Taste it and tell me." "That's not a ratio. It's better." Lila hesitated, but only briefly. She dipped a spoon, tasted, then frowned thoughtfully. "It needs sweetness." "Now you're learning," Grandma said, handing her the sugar. Kyle watched from a distance, arms loosely crossed, a quiet amusement settling into his posture. This was how it always went. Structure met instinct, procedure met experience, and somewhere in the middle something real formed. Of course, the bobcats did not stay politely on the sidelines. They never did. Kyle noticed the shift before anyone else. The way the birds went quiet, the slight change in the air that came not from danger but from attention. He angled his head subtly, scanning the edge of the property. There, a pair of older cats emerged from the tall grass, moving with the kind of unhurried confidence that came from knowing exactly where they belonged. "Oh no," Lila murmured under her breath, following his gaze. "It's fine," Kyle said, already stepping forward. The children hadn't noticed yet, but they would. The nearer of the two cats approached the planting tables, pausing just outside the circle of activity. Its ears flicked, its eyes tracking movement with calm precision. Emma was the first to see it. "Hi," she said softly. A few others turned, their voices dropping instinctively into whispers. "Don't move suddenly," Lila said immediately, her tone low but firm. The cat stepped closer. And then, with absolute disregard for human expectations, it leapt lightly onto the edge of the table. The entire group froze. The cat walked between the pots as if inspecting them, tail raised, gaze sharp. Marcus leaned toward Kyle, voice barely audible. "Is it judging us?" "Yes," Kyle said. "Are we passing?" Kyle tilted his head. "In progress." The cat stopped beside one of the freshly potted plants, sniffed it, then very deliberately sat down. Right in the middle of the work, a collective groan rose from the children. "That's mine," Noah protested. The cat blinked slowly, unmoved. Lila pressed her lips together, clearly fighting between concern and something dangerously close to laughter. "Do we relocate it?" she asked. Kyle shook his head. "Watch." He stepped closer, not hurried, not cautious, just present. "Hey," he said quietly. The cat turned its head toward him, eyes flicking briefly over his face. Recognition again. Kyle reached out, resting his hand gently on the back of its neck. He didn't push, didn't guide with force, just applied the slightest suggestion of movement. The cat stood, stretched, and, with all the dignity it could muster, stepped off the table. Problem solved. "That's it?" Lila asked. "That's it." She stared at him. "That's not a system. That's a relationship." Kyle shrugged lightly. Same difference, sometimes. The disruption seemed to embolden the others. One by one, more bobcats drifted closer. They didn't swarm, didn't overwhelm, but they filled the space in a way that was impossible to ignore. A young one brushed past a chaperone's leg, nearly causing her to jump out of her shoes. Another settled in the shade near the lemonade station, tail flicking lazily as if it had every right to be there. And the children adapted faster than anyone. "They're like big kittens," Emma whispered. "Not kittens," Lila corrected gently. "Just behaving like them today." Marcus crouched slowly near one that had stretched out along the grass. "Can I sit here?" he asked, not expecting an answer. The cat didn't move. Marcus took that as permission. Kyle exchanged a glance with Lila. "That could go wrong," she said quietly. "It could," he agreed. They both watched. Marcus stayed perfectly still, hands resting on his knees. After a moment, the cat shifted, nudging lightly against his side before settling again. Marcus's face lit up with a quiet, disbelieving joy. "It likes me," he whispered. Lila exhaled slowly. "I'm revising my expectations." Kyle smiled faintly. "Good." Time slipped. Activities continued, half planned and half improvised. The rhythm of the day carried by laughter, discovery, and the occasional unexpected interruption from their wild observers. The lines between lesson and experience blurred completely. By the time the lemonade was poured and the last pots were lined up to catch the sun, the initial tension had dissolved into something lighter, something genuine. Lila wiped her hands on a towel, stepping back to take it all in. The children scattered across the yard, Kyle moving easily between them, the bobcats woven into the scene like they'd always belonged there. She walked over to him, stopping just at his side. "You were right," she said. Kyle glanced at her. "About this." She gestured broadly. "It is real." He nodded once. "Told you." She was quiet for a moment, then softer. "And you are exactly where you're supposed to be out here." Kyle didn't answer right away. He looked across the property. The dock in the distance, the trees shifting in the breeze, the quiet presence of the cats at the edges of everything. "Yeah," he said finally. Lila studied him, something thoughtful settling behind her expression. "Do you ever leave it?" she asked. Kyle's gaze lingered on the horizon just a fraction too long. "Not really," he said. She didn't press further. But the question didn't disappear. It hung there, unanswered in a way that suggested it would matter later. And somewhere beyond the yard, just out of sight, the rest of the bobcats waited. Watching. Always watching. Chapter 5. The incident, the shift, when it came, was subtle enough that only Kyle noticed it at first. The day had settled into an easy rhythm. Laughter, movement, the soft clink of tools and glasses. The children drifted between planting and lemonade, their earlier caution dissolved into confidence. Even the bobcats seemed to mirror that ease, scattered across the property in loose clusters, lounging or observing with relaxed indifference. Too relaxed, Kyle thought. He stood near the edge of the yard, scanning the tree line. Years of quiet familiarity had taught him to read the small things. A tail held a little too stiff, ears angled just slightly wrong. the absence of a certain kind of stillness. Something wasn't off. But something also wasn't entirely right. Kyle? He turned. Lila stood a few feet behind him, arms folded loosely, her attention already trained in the same direction. You feel that too? She asked. Kyle gave a small nod. Yeah. What is it? Not sure yet. They didn't speak for another few seconds, both watching. Then Kyle saw it. Movement quicker than the others, smaller, lighter. A juvenile. There, he said quietly. It darted from the edge of the grass toward the far side of the yard, weaving between shadows, not toward the settled groups, but away. Alone. Kyle's posture shifted immediately. That one shouldn't be by itself, he murmured. Before Lila could respond, a voice rang out from across the yard. Wait for me. Kyle's head snapped toward the sound. Jacob. Third row, near the lemonade table earlier. High energy, impulsive, always just one step ahead of instructions. And now already moving. The boy had seen the same cat and decided to follow it. Jacob, stop. Lila called, her voice sharp, instinct snapping into place. But momentum had already taken hold. Jacob hesitated just for a fraction of a second, then kept going. Not running wildly, not recklessly, but determined. I just want to see it, he shouted over his shoulder. Kyle was already moving. He didn't shout again, didn't add to the noise. He just walked quickly, steadily, cutting a diagonal path that would intercept rather than chase. Stay where you are, he called, his tone firm but level. Jacob slowed. That was something. Mr. Benson, it went this way. I know. The juvenile bobcat had stopped just beyond the yard now, near the low slope that led toward the river. It turned once, glancing back. Not startled, not aggressive, just aware. Kyle read it instantly. Curiosity matched with distance, but a young animal still learning its limits. And Jacob, stepping right into that space. Okay, Kyle said as he reached the boy, placing a gentle but unmistakable hand on his shoulder. We're stopping here. Jacob looked up at him, breathing quick with excitement. But it's right there. I know. It didn't run away. That doesn't mean we keep following. Jacob frowned, confusion flickering. Why not? Kyle crouched slightly, bringing himself to eye level. Because it came this far on its own, he said. And now it gets to decide what happens next. Not us. Jacob glanced toward the cat, then back at Kyle. So we wait. If we do anything, we wait. Behind them, Lila approached, more measured now but still clearly alert. She positioned herself just off to the side. Not crowding, but present. You all right? She asked. Kyle nodded once. Yeah. Her gaze flicked to Jacob. You gave us a bit of a situation there. Jacob looked down. Sorry. The apology softened the edges. It's okay, Kyle said. Just means we need to slow down. For a moment, everything held. The boy, the teachers, the cat. Then, without warning, the atmosphere shifted. A sound low, sharp, almost electric, cut through the air. Not loud, but unmistakable. Jacob flinched. Lila stiffened. What was that? She asked, her voice dropping. Kyle didn't answer immediately. His attention had moved past the juvenile cat, to the ridge of grass just beyond it. Another form emerged. Larger, older, slower but far more deliberate. The adult bobcat stepped into view, its posture coiled with quiet intensity, eyes fixed not on Kyle, but on Jacob. Okay, Lila said very softly. That's new. Kyle stood, one hand still resting lightly on Jacob's shoulder. That's the mother, he said. Jacob's grip tightened unconsciously on Kyle's sleeve. She looks mad. She's not mad, Kyle said. She's watching. The distinction mattered, even if it didn't feel like it. Lila shifted her stance slightly, placing herself just behind and to the side of Jacob without making it obvious. What do we do? She asked. Kyle inhaled slowly. The answer wasn't complicated, but it had to be exact. We stay calm, he said. We don't move fast. We don't turn our backs. And the others? She asked. Kyle flicked a glance toward the yard. Grandpa was already moving subtly, guiding the children and the remaining adults back, away from the edge, his motions so natural they barely registered as instruction. Of course he was. Kyle felt a brief, steadying thread of reassurance pass through him. They're fine, he said. The adult bobcat took one step forward. Not aggressive, but claiming space. Jacob inhaled sharply. Hey, Kyle said quietly, redirecting the boy's attention. Look at me. Jacob did. Slow breath, Kyle instructed. Jacob tried. Came out shaky, but it came. Good, Kyle said. Again. Beside them, Lila mirrored the calm, her own breathing deliberate, steady, anchoring the moment without words. The juvenile cat shifted, glancing between them and the larger one. Kyle read the posture. Communication. Assessment. He lowered himself slightly, not crouching fully, just enough to soften his presence. All right, he said, not to the boy, not to Lila, but to the space itself. That's far enough. It wasn't a command. More a boundary. Held quietly. The adult cat paused, ears flicking. The tension stretched but didn't snap. Seconds passed. Then, slowly, deliberately, the cat shifted its attention. Not away but differently. It stepped forward once more, then angled toward the juvenile, nudging it lightly with its head. The smaller cat responded immediately, turning and moving back toward the taller grass. The adult followed. Just like that, the moment dissolved. Kyle exhaled. Not sharply, just enough to release what had been held. Behind him, Lila did the same. Okay, she said after a beat. That was not part of the lesson plan. No, Kyle agreed. Jacob let out a breath that sounded halfway to a laugh. That was so cool. Kyle gave him a look. Jacob immediately corrected. Also, a little scary. Good, Kyle said. That means you were paying attention. He stood fully, guiding the boy gently back toward the main yard. No more solo expeditions, Lila added, a hint of firmness returning to her voice. Yes, ma'am, Jacob said, subdued but clearly still processing everything he'd just experienced. As they rejoined the group, the energy was different. Quieter. Not fearful but aware. Respect had settled in where curiosity alone had been before. Grandma pressed a fresh glass of lemonade into Jacob's hands without a word. He took it like it was something important. Kyle met his grandfather's eyes across the yard. A brief nod passed between them. Handled. Beside Kyle, Lila crossed her arms loosely, watching the children with new consideration. That, she said softly, was the part you didn't explain. Kyle followed her gaze. No, he said. That's the part you feel. She glanced at him. And you're still calm. Kyle thought about that. About the edge they'd just walked. About the line between familiarity and danger. Not calm, he said finally. Just steady. Lila exhaled slowly. I think I understand the difference now. Kyle glanced toward the grass one last time. The cats were gone again. Not vanished. Just back where they belonged. And for the first time that day, the laughter that returned carried something deeper than excitement. Carried respect. And the beginning of understanding. Chapter 6. Evening calm. The afternoon softened almost without anyone noticing. The sharp edges of excitement, the heightened awareness after the incident, even the restless energy that had filled the yard earlier. All of it seemed to settle into something quieter. The sun dipped lower, turning the light warmer, stretching shadows across the open field and giving the entire property that familiar, slow exhale Kyle had known his whole life. The children felt it too. Their laughter continued, but it changed. Less explosive, more steady. Conversations lingered, movements slowed. Even the bobcats, scattered among the edges of the yard, seemed more at ease, stretched out in patches of sun or drifting lazily between trees. Kyle leaned against the porch railing, taking it in. Nothing forced, nothing staged. It had turned out exactly the way he'd hoped, and not at all like he'd planned. Dinner crowd's going to be jealous, his grandmother said, stepping up beside him with a soft creak of the wooden boards. Kyle glanced at her. Of all this, she said, gesturing toward the children. They always miss the good days. Kyle smiled faintly. You say that every time. Because it's always true. She nudged his shoulder lightly with her own. You did good, bringing them out here. They did most of it, Kyle replied. That's the point, she said. Kyle didn't argue. He watched Marcus crouched near the row of planted pots, explaining, incorrectly but enthusiastically, how the seeds were already starting to grow underneath. Emma and two others listened as if he were delivering scientific fact. Nearby, Lila stood with one of the parent chaperones, her posture relaxed now, one hand tucked loosely in her pocket, the other holding a glass of lemonade she hadn't quite finished. Kyle noticed the moment her gaze drifted toward him. It didn't linger overly long, but it stayed long enough to be intentional. Go on, his grandmother said softly. You're staring. I am not. You are, she insisted mildly. And she's staring back. Kyle sighed quietly. You've been waiting to say that all day, she smiled. I enjoy a developing situation. Kyle shook his head, but the corner of his mouth lifted anyway. Just go talk, she added. You're not busy. I'm supervising. With your eyes from 20 feet away? She asked. That counts. Not today it doesn't. Kyle hesitated. Then, after a brief moment that didn't quite qualify as surrender, he pushed off from the railing and made his way across the yard. He found Lila near the edge of the slope that led down toward the river, her attention fixed on the line of trees beyond. She didn't turn when he approached, but she spoke anyway. I was wondering how long you'd stay over there pretending not to think, she said. Kyle stopped beside her. I wasn't pretending. Of course not. He followed her gaze toward the trees. They've moved back, she said. Most of them, he agreed. That mother and the younger one too? Kyle nodded. They'll keep their distance for a while. Because of earlier. Yes. Lila took a slow breath, letting it out just as evenly. I keep replaying it, she admitted. Not in a bad way. Just trying to understand the line. Kyle tilted his head slightly. What line? Between what you trust and what you don't, she said. He considered that. That line moves, he said. That's not a comfortable answer. It's an honest one. Lila let out a quiet half-laugh. You really don't simplify things for people, do you? I thought I did. You simplify outcomes, she corrected. Not the reasoning behind them. Kyle accepted that with a small nod. They stood like that for a moment side by side, the quiet stretching between them in a way that didn't feel empty. I grew up with rules, Lila said eventually. Clear ones. Static ones. If you follow them, you get predictable results. Did it work? Kyle asked. Mostly, she said. Until it didn't. Kyle glanced at her, waiting. She didn't elaborate. Not yet. Instead, she looked out over the slope again, her shoulders loosening as a light breeze moved through the tall grass. This place doesn't follow rules, she added. It does, Kyle said. They're just not written down anywhere. And you know them. Some of them. That's worse. Kyle smiled faintly. Why? Because I don't, she said. He let that sit for a moment before answering. You don't have to, he said. You just have to pay attention. Lila turned to look at him fully now. I've been paying attention all day, she said. I know. And I still don't understand how you stay so steady. Kyle's gaze drifted past her, toward the faint shimmer of the river between the trees. I had a lot of time to practice, he said. Out here. Mostly. And nowhere else? That question landed differently. Kyle didn't answer right away. The dock came into view in his mind. The old wood, worn smooth, the way the light used to hit the water in the evenings. Hours spent sitting beside his grandfather, listening to stories that blurred the line between truth and lesson. I go other places, he said finally. But you don't leave this, Lila said, not as a question. Kyle met her eyes. No, he admitted. Lila studied him quietly. Why? She asked. Kyle exhaled slowly, shifting his weight slightly as he considered the simplest answer. Because it works, he said. For you. For me, he agreed. And you've never wondered if working is the same as enough? The question didn't come out sharp. It wasn't meant to challenge. But it did anyway. Kyle held her gaze for a second longer than he normally would have. I haven't needed more, he said. That's not what I asked. He almost smiled at that. I know. A distant shout of laughter carried up from the yard, pulling both their attention back for a moment. The children were gathered again near the lemonade table, comparing their plants like they were trophies. Lila looked between them and Kyle. You're good with them, she said. They're easy. They're not, she replied. You just make it look like they are. Kyle shrugged lightly. They respond to consistency. So do adults, she said. Not as reliably. That earned a quiet laugh. Fair, she admitted. Another pause settled in. But this one felt different. Closer. Less about observation, more about presence. You didn't panic today, Kyle said after a moment. Lila raised an eyebrow. I absolutely did. Internally, he clarified. Professionally contained panic, she corrected. It didn't show. She let out a breath. Good. It mattered, he said. She looked at him questioningly. Jacob trusted you, Kyle explained. He needed that. Lila's expression softened slightly. I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing, she admitted. You were. How do you know? Because you stayed, he said. And you didn't rush him. Lila absorbed that quietly, her gaze dropping briefly before lifting again. Thank you, she said. Kyle nodded once. The light shifted again, deeper now, warmer. Evening settling in. We should probably head back soon, Lila said after a minute. Before they all fall asleep on the bus and none of the parents forgive us. Yeah, Kyle agreed. Neither of them moved immediately. The moment stretched just a little longer. Then Lila broke it, stepping past him and starting back toward the yard. Next time, she said over her shoulder. You tell me about the part with the dock before we get here. Kyle watched her go, the faintest smile settling into place. Next time, he echoed quietly. He didn't say it out loud. But for the first time, the idea didn't feel automatic. Or assumed. Felt chosen. And that was new. Chapter 7, The Lesson That Sticks. Leaving took longer than anyone expected. Not because of confusion or disorganization, but because no one seemed entirely ready to let the day end. The children lingered in small pockets across the yard, returning for one last look at their potted plants, one more sip of lemonade, one more cautious glance toward the edges where the bobcats had been. Kyle stood near the bus again, ticking off names in his head as much as from the list Lila handed him. Marcus, here. Emma, here. Jacob. A small pause. Then, here, came his voice, quieter than usual. Kyle looked up. Jacob stood a step behind the others, his posture different than it had been that morning. Less restless, more deliberate. The boy met Kyle's gaze for a second, then gave a small, almost private nod. Kyle returned it. That was enough. All right, he said, raising his voice slightly. Let's pack it up. The children shuffled forward, climbing onto the bus with reluctant energy, half eager to talk about what they just experienced, half unwilling to leave it behind. Grandma made her rounds, pressing cookies into hands regardless of prior consumption limits, while Grandpa stayed nearer the edge of the yard, watching the property settle back into itself as the group began to recede. Lila lingered again, as she had earlier, her attention split between departure logistics and something less defined. "You turned a science lesson into this?" she said, gesturing loosely toward the yard, now half empty but still holding the echo of the day. Kyle followed her gaze. "They'll remember it." "That's not what I meant." He glanced at her. "They learned something," she continued, "but not the way I expected." Kyle waited. Lila shook her head slightly, as if searching for a better way to explain it. "I've done field trips before," she said. "Structured. Contained. You prepare the material, you guide them through it, and you make sure they absorb it." She glanced toward the slope, where the grass still stirred faintly in the breeze. "This wasn't like that," she added. "No," Kyle agreed. "They absorbed it anyway. Probably more." Lila let out a quiet breath. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Kyle leaned lightly against the side of the bus, arms resting casually at his sides. "Kids don't always learn from what you tell them," he said. "They learn from what feels real." Lila crossed her arms, considering that. "And today felt real," she said. "It was." She glanced at him, a hint of a smile returning. "You make that sound simple." Kyle shrugged. "It usually is. For you. For anyone," he corrected gently. "It just takes getting out of the way a little." Lila huffed softly. "I don't get out of the way very often." "I noticed." "Is that a criticism?" "No," he said. "It worked today." She gave him a sideways look. "That sounds like a very careful answer." "It's an accurate one." Before she could respond, Emma's voice rang out from inside the bus. "Mr. Benson, can we come back here again?" Kyle tilted his head slightly, looking up at the row of expectant faces pressed against the windows. "We'll see," he said. "That means yes," someone declared. "That means maybe," Lila corrected, stepping forward. The children groaned. Kyle smiled faintly. "Listen to Ms. Hart. She's no fun," Marcus muttered. "I heard that," Lila replied calmly. The bus driver gave a short honk, a polite reminder that time existed even out here. Kyle turned back toward the house. His grandparents had moved closer now, standing side by side, their presence steady and familiar. "Looks like they survived," Grandpa said. "Barely," Kyle replied. Grandma smiled warmly. "They'll talk about this for weeks." "Months," Lila added. Grandma's gaze shifted to her, appraising and kind all at once. "You handled yourself well, dear." Lila blinked slightly. "Thank you. I wasn't sure I was." "You stayed calm when it mattered," Grandpa said. "That's what counts." Lila considered that, then nodded. "I'm learning." "Aren't we all?" Grandma said. Kyle watched the exchange quietly. Something about the way Lila stood, still alert, still thoughtful but no longer distant, felt like a quiet shift. Not dramatic, not immediate, but undeniable. "We should head back," Lila said after a moment, glancing toward the bus. Kyle nodded. "Yeah." He hugged his grandmother briefly, then shook his grandfather's hand. "Come by next weekend," Grandpa said. "I will. And bring her," Grandma added, gesturing lightly toward Lila. Lila raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like an invitation I didn't agree to." "You're agreeing now," Grandma said smoothly. Kyle couldn't help the faint laugh that slipped out. Lila glanced between them, then sighed softly. "We'll see." "That's a yes," Grandma said, entirely satisfied. The bus ride back was quieter. Exhaustion had settled in, blending with contentment in a way that softened the earlier bursts of energy. Some children dozed against the windows, others talked in hushed voices, replaying moments, comparing experiences. "I swear it looked at me," one whispered. "It did," another replied. "Do you think it remembers us?" Silence. "Maybe," Emma said carefully. Near the front, Jacob sat upright, staring out the window, his earlier impulsiveness replaced with something more contemplative. Kyle took his seat again, leaning back just enough to relax without disengaging. Lila slid in beside him a few seconds later, setting her now-forgotten clipboard between them. "Well," she said, exhaling softly. "That was a day." It was. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes briefly. "I didn't expect to enjoy it this much," she admitted. Kyle glanced at her. "You didn't look like you weren't enjoying it." "I'm very good at maintaining composure," she said dryly. "I'm starting to see through that." Lila opened one eye slightly. "Careful. That sounds like progress." Kyle smiled faintly. "Maybe." A quiet pause followed. Then softer, Lila said, "The situation earlier with Jacob." Kyle nodded. "I keep thinking about how quickly it could have gone differently." "It could have," he agreed. "And you didn't rush it. That would have made it worse." She shifted slightly, turning her head to look at him more directly now. "You trusted him to settle," she said. "I trusted the space to hold long enough for him to," Kyle corrected. "That's a risky approach. It's a necessary one sometimes." Lila studied him in silence for a moment. "I don't do that," she said. "Not yet," Kyle replied. She huffed softly, but there was no real resistance behind it. Today forced it, she admitted. And she looked out the window again, watching the countryside fade back into something more familiar. It worked, she said. Kyle nodded once. That's something you don't forget, he added. No, she said quietly. It's not. Another moment passed. Then Lila shifted again, her tone lighter this time. So, she said. About this dock you conveniently didn't mention ahead of time. Kyle chuckled softly. It's just a place to sit. That's not convincing. It's not meant to be. She tilted her head, studying him with renewed curiosity. You're going to have to show me, she said. Kyle didn't hesitate. All right. The answer seemed to land more solidly than he expected. Lila blinked once, as if recalibrating, then recovered quickly. Next time, she clarified. Kyle glanced out the window, then back at her. Next time, he agreed. The bus rolled on, carrying them back toward routine, toward structure, toward everything that made sense in a different way. But something had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to matter. And as Kyle settled back into his seat, letting the rhythm of the road carry the quiet forward, he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, working and enough weren't exactly the same thing anymore. Chapter 8. A simple step forward. Monday felt smaller. Not worse. Not dull. Just contained. Kyle stood in his classroom early, as he always did, setting out the trays of potted seedlings the children had brought back from the trip. Each pot held a small handwritten label, some neat, some nearly illegible, and beneath the loose soil, something had already started to change. It was subtle, invisible really, but he knew it was happening. He stepped back, wiping his hands on a cloth, and glanced around the room. Everything was as it had been before. Desks in rows, whiteboard clean, the soft hum of the building waking up for the week. And yet, something had shifted. Not in the space. In him. Mr. Benson. Emma burst through the door first, backpack bouncing again, though her pace slowed as soon as her eyes found the seedlings. They're here, she said, almost reverently. They are, Kyle replied. She moved closer, crouching to inspect them. Do you think they're growing already? Kyle leaned against the desk. I think they've started. That's so cool, she whispered. Others followed quickly after, Marcus, Jacob, the rest of the class, each drawn instinctively toward the small collection of pots like they were extensions of the day they hadn't quite let go of yet. They're mine, Marcus announced, hovering protectively over one. I mean, they're all ours, but this one is my responsibility. That's a good way to look at it, Kyle said. Jacob stood a little farther back at first, watching rather than jumping in. Kyle noticed. After a minute, he walked over, stopping beside him without making it obvious. You want to check yours? Kyle asked. Jacob hesitated, then nodded. They stepped closer together. Jacob leaned down, studying the surface of the soil like he expected to catch it in the act of doing something. I didn't mess it up, right? He asked quietly. Kyle shook his head. No. Even with yesterday? Kyle followed his gaze, not to the plant but somewhere beyond it. You learned something yesterday, Kyle said. That doesn't mess anything up. It makes it better. Jacob considered that for a moment, then gave a small nod. Okay, he said. He stayed a little longer this time. That was enough. The morning moved easily after that. Lessons unfolded, discussions sparked, and every so often, one of the children would glance toward the plants like they held some kind of answer. Kyle didn't rush them through it. He let it sit, let it work. By midday, the rhythm of school had fully returned, but it carried something with it now, something quieter, steadier, something real. Kyle was cleaning up after lunch when he heard the knock. 2 light taps against the frame. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. Come in, he said. Lila stepped inside, holding a stack of papers that she didn't seem particularly concerned about. Her eyes moved immediately to the back table. They made it, she said. Kyle followed her gaze. They did. She walked over, setting the papers aside without thinking, and examined the pots more closely. They're already checking them every 10 minutes, she added. That'll slow down, Kyle said. Eventually. She glanced at him, one eyebrow lifting. You're enjoying this? A little. More than a little. Kyle didn't deny it. Lila smiled faintly, then straightened, brushing her hands together even though they weren't dirty. I had a parent email this morning, she said. Good or bad? Confused, she replied. That sounds accurate. She said her son tried to explain what happened, but kept stopping halfway through like he didn't have the right words. Kyle tilted his head. What did you tell her? Lila crossed her arms loosely. That sometimes there aren't the right words. Kyle smiled faintly. That's a new answer for you. I'm evolving, she said dryly. He nodded. I've noticed. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. So, she said, shifting slightly, her tone light but not casual. About next weekend. Kyle didn't pretend not to understand. The dock, he said. The dock, she confirmed. He considered her for a second. Not cautiously, just thoughtfully. It's quiet out there, he said. Not much to do. That sounds like exactly the point, she replied. It usually is. Lila nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. Good, she said. Then I'll bring coffee. Kyle's lips curved slightly. That works. She picked up her stack of papers again, but didn't leave right away. There's something else, she said. Kyle waited. I've been thinking, she continued, about what you said on the bus. Kyle frowned slightly. I say a lot of things on buses. About working and enough, she clarified. He leaned back against the desk, considering. And, he prompted. Lila met his gaze directly. I don't think you were wrong, she said. It does work. Kyle nodded once. But I think you've been relying on that answer, she added. He didn't respond immediately. Not because he disagreed. Because he didn't. I probably have, he admitted. Lila's expression softened. Not in sympathy, but in understanding. That's not a bad thing, she said. It just means you stopped asking the question. Kyle crossed his arms loosely, mirroring her posture from earlier without meaning to. And you think I should start asking it again? I think, she said carefully, that maybe you already are. The room went quiet around them, not empty, just still. Kyle let that sit. Let it settle the way the day before had settled into everything else. Maybe, he said. Lila smiled, small but genuine. That's enough for now, she said. She turned then, heading toward the door, but paused just before stepping out. Oh, and Kyle. Yeah. If I end up surrounded by 30 bobcats again next weekend. Kyle raised an eyebrow. Yes. I'm holding you personally responsible. That seems fair, he said. She nodded once, satisfied, and left. Kyle stood there for a moment after she was gone. The classroom felt the same, looked the same, but it didn't feel contained anymore. Not entirely. He pushed off from the desk and walked over to the plants, crouching slightly beside them. One of the labels caught his eye, Emma's careful handwriting, slightly uneven but deliberate. He brushed a bit of loose soil aside with his fingers, not digging, not disturbing, just checking. Nothing visible. Not yet. He sat back on his heels, a faint smile settling into place. Started, he murmured. The word lingered, not just for the plants, for everything. Outside the window, the day carried on, predictable, familiar. Inside, something had shifted forward. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. And for once, Kyle didn't feel the need to keep it exactly where it was. Instead, he stood, straightened, and let the moment move with him. Simple, steady, and finally just a little bit more than enough.